I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me. Hey everyone, welcome back. It's episode 66 of the Future Template Parent podcast. I am your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, PhD, EMDR consultant, and mom of 3 daughters. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm getting a little bit more clinical again. We've had some more businessy episodes. Now I'm going to talk more clinical. I'm going to talk today about IGTEP, a good old acronym, the Integrative Group Trauma Episode Protocol. So many acronyms. Integrated Group Trauma Episode Protocol, I think that's what it is. The group, yes. And of course, you'll get even more information about this if you work with me. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview and some thoughts on why I think it's great for an intensive format, how it could be used in an intensive. But yeah, anytime you work with me, whether it's in a group format or one-on-one in a VIP day, you would get access to a full description and like training from me on how to use it. So let's get into it, just to give you some info. So what is IGTEP, the Integrative, I think that's what it is, Traumatic Episode Protocol? Maybe I should have looked it up. You may be thinking, well, IGTEP sounds a lot like RTEP, the Recent Traumatic Event Protocol, which I have talked about a lot, and you are correct. They were both invented by Dr. Nacho Herrero, that's his nickname, both intended to be an early intervention for traumatic stress. Dr. Herrero also pioneered the ASSIST protocol, which I've talked about before. Episode 37 was all about that. It's another earlier intervention. It's almost like mental health first aid. It's not technically an EMDR protocol, but it has some EMDR type elements. And it's usable even in the immediate aftermath of trauma, even when where traumatic stress is ongoing. For example, war, living in a refugee camp in the aftermath of a natural disaster. Obviously, in those cases, there's probably still traumatic stuff going on. There isn't like stability that's been achieved after the traumatic episode. So yeah, these situations require processing that's different than traditional EMDR. Traditional EMDR assumes that there has been some post-traumatic safety period, right, during which memories have been consolidated in some way, maybe maladaptively stored, but still stored somehow. And I'm sure that all of us can think of clients for whom there's never really a post-traumatic safety period. That's another reason why I like using RTEP and why IGTEP is also intriguing to me. So IGTEP is an EMDR protocol, but it's conducted in a group format, of course, which is really interesting. A lot of us don't think about EMDR as a group modality. Of course, there are some slight adjustments to make it fit, for a group, and there are common elements. An important piece about GTEP is that it's, IGTEP is that it's seen through the lens of ongoing traumatic stress, right? And because of that, because there's this idea of ongoing traumatic stress, the way the targeted memory is selected is slightly different, both in RTEP and in GTEP. That allows for the identification, the targeting, and the processing of this continuum of multiple traumatic experiences that's happening, ongoing. And we're not just focusing on a single target, but the way that, you do the processing, the idea is that it's kind of applicable to a larger, spectrum of what's going on for this person. So there can be, smaller group settings that you can do GTEP with. The research shows that you can do 3 to 15 or even as large as up to 50. People who've been through the same kind of ongoing or prolonged traumatic events. So maybe they've been through the same event itself, or maybe similar events, right? Like sexual abuse, severe interpersonal violence, people who professionals who are at risk for traumatic stress, like, NGOs dealing with natural disasters, emergency response personnel, the military who are on duty, life-changing experiences with ongoing traumatic stress or extreme stressors. So, individuals that are experiencing life-changing things that also have long-term or ongoing extreme stress, right? Refugees, displaced persons, long-term disasters, prolonged violent conflicts, terrorism, or any kind of sort of ongoing trauma. So something else that can be done with the groups is if people have histories with unifying circumstances in common. cancer patients, for example, couples and families with ongoing domestic violence that hasn't been resolved. You can think of many, many more examples, I'm sure, and probably, I can think of parenting examples as a parent. Probably there are situations you're thinking of for your own niche population for which this might be useful. So that's pretty cool, right? Okay, so what does IGTEP actually look like? So I'm going to kind of summarize some of the phases. I'm going to kind of go through the 8 phases. Some I'm going to go into a little more detail, others not so much, because there's a lot of details, especially like phases 3 and 4. That would be something we could go through really, really in a lot of detail if we worked together. But just to kind of give you a sense of some of how this works and how it's different from sort of traditional EMDR, beyond the fact that it's a group, right? So phase 1, history taking. When you're working with a group, you're going to do history taking individually. So one thing about GTEP is IGTEP. I'm just going to leave off the I. GTEP, it's easier to say. You're probably not going to be doing it alone. You're probably going to want another practitioner with you, but that's cool. Like that's doable. And what a great kind of collaborative opportunity. And of course, you would price accordingly. So both of you are receiving, compensation that is, in accordance with the time that you're putting in. So, you're going to do individually with each member. So there's going to be more than one of you doing history taking. You can probably do this in about 30 minutes. This is what the research shows. Mainly looking for red flags that might not necessarily be a total rule out, but you'd want to watch this individual closely, make sure they're able to engage in resourcing in phase 2. Maybe, if this person is really struggling, you might take them out of the group, work with them individually, maybe provide some one-on-one EMDR at some point. Remember, this is ongoing traumatic stress, right? Many of these individuals cannot be sure of current or future safety, which is often considered a rule out for EMDR, right? So we're including individuals that we might not include in other settings. So what are the red flags? Signs of dissociative disorders, ongoing suicidal or homicidal ideation, like really significant self-harm, significant substance abuse, diagnosis of maybe psychosis or bipolar disorder, complete, utter, total lack of any kind of support, significant cognitive impairment. These are not automatic rule outs. They're just things to take into account as you're sort of assessing people's appropriateness. They might be able to do the group with additional support. They might need one-to-one. Of course, you're going to get informed consent during this part as well. Phase 2, after that individual history taking, you're going to introduce all the team members, any of the people that are going to be working with the individuals in the group. Introduce everyone, briefly explain EMDR, very brief, just pulling from the language that Dr. Herrero suggests. This is all he says to kind of explain it, right? We can digest a light meal with no problem, but when we eat heavy food like whatever, Thanksgiving dinner, or if you're working with with a population that's primarily from, a non-American culture, you'd probably want to choose something that's relevant to their culture. Obviously, Thanksgiving dinner would not be that. This kind of food is hard to digest and can make you, have a stomach ache, can make you really tired, can make you feel sick the next day, whatever. In the same way, heavy information such as the experiences that you're currently going through are difficult for the brain to digest and can give you symptoms, right? What are some of the symptoms you've noticed? You're going to have people respond, and then you normalize, say all those things are normal, given what your brain is attempting to process, okay? That's it. That's all he says, okay? That's the whole explanation. You don't need to go deeply into the AIP model. You don't need to talk about sitting on the train, all these things. You can keep it simple, okay? And that metaphor of digestion, makes sense to most people. All of us eat and all of us digest, right? So then you're going to teach the group 3 self-soothing exercises, like the protocol gives you all the wording and explains it, an abdominal breathing exercise, a breathing exercise that also involves some concentration to kind of test the person's ability to concentrate, which of course, if you're concentrating on your breathing, that's soothing you from, other stuff. And then what he calls the pleasant place exercise. All of these have scripts that are provided in the pleasant place or pleasant time. I like that language because it's not safe calm, because what if these people don't have a safe calm place or can't even imagine one, right? But probably, maybe they can imagine something pleasant sometime when they felt some security, or maybe it's something in their mind, right? Especially if someone has ongoing traumatic stress, they may have created kind of these internal worlds to help them regulate, right? Then you teach the butterfly hug after you've done these 3 exercises. Briefly explain what the SUD is, because they're going to use that. And then you teach, and the butterfly hug, the reason you teach that is because everyone can self-administer that in the group, right? You can't do eye movements with everyone. You can have everyone tap, and also it's super soothing and regulating. It's a gentle form of BLS. Of course, connecting with their own bodies is great, and this is something they can use on their own, right? So that's phase 2. I want you to notice how quickly we move through that, and how quickly we're moving through that with a heavily traumatized group, okay? This to me is more evidence that we get super caught up in phases 1 and 2 in preparation when we don't need to be, and that there is sort of a fear response for a lot of us about like delving deep into phases 3 and 4, like, oh no, we're going to harm the person. This is all they're doing for preparation, and they're going right into it. So as long as you're creating safety, you have attunement, like a group actually provides some safety too. We need to sort of get over this intense fear of phase 4, okay? Because it's, especially if you're doing intensives, that's why people are there, is to get through trauma processing. Anyone can teach a client like mindfulness skills, which is kind of what, and relaxation skills, which is kind of what phase 2 is. Like most of us have learned that no matter what our orientation is, the trauma processing element is what makes EMDR different, and the AIP model. So like, let's actually use that. Phases 3 and 4. I'm not going to go into full details here because there's a lot to it, but what makes this group so different, this process, this protocol, so different and so interesting, and what makes it to be able to apply to group is that it uses drawing, okay? Each individual is working on their own drawing. Paper, crayons, colored pencils, markers, whatever. And that's how they're connecting with the distressing targets. They're not talking, okay? So you're going to, every person takes a piece of paper and folds it into 4 quadrants and like labels them A, B, C, D, okay? And then and they have their crayons, they have their whatever. You say, like, let's use the mental, like run through a mental movie and stop on whatever's the most distressing part of the situation right now, okay? That's, the mental movie is also what we use in RTEP, sort of a similar approach. And then you have them draw that most distressing part, okay? And there is something very, it's so, putting things into words, often we can't articulate the experience in the same way. I think the drawing is beautiful. This is something you could absolutely use in one-to-one as well. But it's essential to do this with a group, because you can't be talking to each person about their stuff, right? And if someone isn't really literate or writing is hard or whatever, this is most of us can make something visual and put it on paper, right? For successive sessions after you've done them, like this one is, I'll talk about the rest about it, but like this is the successive sessions after you've done this first most distressing piece, is you'll say, run the mental movie, and whatever distressing point you stop on first, that will be the first target. So essentially, for each processing session, like I said, you've divided the paper into 4 quadrants. In quadrant A, they're going to draw that most distressing part, whatever the target is. And they're going to do butterfly hug, and you're going to say, like, stop whenever it feels good to your body to stop. When most everyone has stopped, you're going to say, okay, quadrant B, now draw how you're feeling. Like after they've done the butterfly hug, they draw that. And then they're going to record the SUD for that, okay, for that particular moment. Then they're going to do butterfly hug again, butterfly tap. Same process for quadrant C. How are you feeling now? Draw it in quadrant C. Record the SUD. Butterfly hug. Okay. Quadrant D, draw how you're feeling right now. Record the SUD. Butterfly hug. That's sort of one processing session right there. And then you're going to ask them to look all of the quadrants. Of those 4 quadrants at this point, choose the drawing that's the most disturbing, and then write the SUD for that on the back of the paper, okay? Like wherever they are with that. Phase 5 is what we call future vision. Okay. On the back of the paper, after writing the SUD of the most distressing or disturbing picture, draw how they see themselves in the future, whatever that means to them. Then title the drawing, then look at it and do the butterfly hug. Okay. Phase 6, remember the drawing that disturbed you the most. Close your eyes, observe your body from your head to your feet. Notice if you feel any pleasant or unpleasant sensations. When you finish, do the butterfly hug while observing what's happening to you without judging or trying to change it. Stop when you feel in your body that it's been enough and lower your hands to your thighs. Phase 7, you're going to do some closure. Do your self-soothing exercise. Breathe deeply, open your eyes. The group facilitators will then invite any member to share about the processing if they would like, sort of making sure everyone still feels contained and soothed. That's closure. Phase 8, okay? So what do we call phase 8? I can't even remember. Reevaluation, right? So interestingly, the clinical observations of the authors have shown that 1 or 2 applications of this protocol is not really enough to achieve like best and lasting clinical results. They really suggest 6 applications in an intensive EMDR format, twice a day for consecutive days, fidelity to protocol, using validated measures to obtain the result. And then after you've done it one time, when you go back to a second one, you don't start with history taking, you're going to start with phase 2 and then continue. So you're going to review all of those self-soothing exercises and then move into the next processing, which you're going to do the same way. You're going to say, run the mental movie, what distressing thing do you stop on? And at the end of all of the group, if you do the 6 sessions over, and I've been told, my experience, what I've seen is that like 60 to 90 minutes is usually how long each one of these takes. So if you're doing 2 a day, that's 3 hours, 3 days, 9 hours, right? And then you're going to sort of see who needs additional support. That could be from a variety of ways that you get that information. You can certainly use the data that you see from what they're doing on the quadrants if they're not feeling better, if they're still struggling with their future vision, if you're hearing reports from anyone in their lives that they're struggling, that might be a sign that more individual follow-up is needed. Okay, that was a lot. I tried to condense it as much as I could to make it not be too overwhelming, but to give you a flavor of the protocol. And so, like I said, a full description of the protocol, how to use it, is part of both my group and individual coaching. It's just one of many, many protocols and tools that I teach and allow you to kind of have my cheat sheets and use on your own. So if you would like a more complete understanding of this protocol and how to use it and how to apply it to an intensive, get that when you work with me. Reach out to me if that's of interest. So how can you use this in intensives? Well, first of all, the protocol itself suggests an intensive format, right? 6 applications, twice a day, consecutive days, and that works best. That would be a 3-day experience. I could also imagine adding individual sessions to the experience for people who choose that. You could make it a requirement, I guess. Maybe an additional 3 hours after the group to resolve individual stuff, to make recommendations for future treatment. This could be integrated so beautifully into like some kind of retreat model. You could come up with many different ways to organize the retreat. People that have experienced a similar trauma, for example, a mass shooting like the school shooting in Georgia that just recently happened. Yay, America. Or it could be people who are all survivors of significant domestic violence, or a history of sexual abuse, or ongoing domestic violence. People from a certain field who are experiencing burnout, vicarious trauma. People in nonprofits working with high needs populations. Many of you have likely been in those jobs. I certainly have. First responders, a workplace that's very, very high stress, that's going through a reorganization and people have lost jobs or whatever. And you don't have to have people from the same organizations, especially if that feels really sensitive or there's some confidentiality or whatever, but similar settings. So there's lots of different ways to think about how to organize the group. If it's a retreat, you could add yoga, massage, hiking, dance, whatever. So many opportunities. And what a great way to offer profound healing to a lot of people, and a great opportunity to make good money for you, and a great networking source, because once people have had this experience with EMDR, they might want to come back, right? And again, something you definitely want to do with a colleague or two, depending on the group size. But I think there's such scope for amazing outcomes here. And I don't think this kind of thing is being done very much. So I think it's an exciting thing to think about. I'm certainly thinking about how to create a retreat around this theme. So fun, and I think I will talk about that. I mean, I definitely will talk about that as it comes up. So I really think that this is something really cool that you could kind of customize in a way that feels really good to you and kind of in alignment with your approach and your niche and all those things. So just a few thoughts on the IGTEP protocol, its high points, how it could be an amazing offering for an intensive. To learn more about this protocol and many others, you can work with me one-to-one this fall in my VIP days. I have a few VIP day slots open. Also going to be running my group program again in early 2025. Just wanted to mention that the VIP day price is going to go up in January 2025. So if you want to lock in the lowest price it's ever going to be, it's going to have to be 2024. So please be in touch on Instagram at Future Template Parent. Check out my website, www.futuretemplateparent.com, for details on everything that's coming up, everything I have going on. You can find the podcast there. You can download my free guide to implementing intensives in your practice. All the good stuff is there. So please connect with me. I love hearing from you. And, even if you just have thoughts on today's episode, please reach out. So I will talk to all of you next week, and I hope you have a wonderful week. And I hope this is something that made you think a little. It's a little bit different. So hope it provided some value. Take care, everybody. Bye.